All right, today we're diving into a really powerful argument that is, no joke, reshaping our world. It's the idea that the old, predictable global order, it's gone. And what's taking its place is something new, way more dangerous, something many are calling the jungle.
I mean, just think about it for a second. What if all the international rules we've depended on for decades, the ones about trade, about diplomacy, about war, were just gone, tossed aside? This isn't just some thought experiment. Nope, it's the core of a hugely influential analysis we're going to break down right now.
To really get a handle on what we've lost, first we need to understand what we had. And the folks behind this theory use this fantastic metaphor. For over 70 years, the world was treated basically like a well-tended garden.
Now, this garden has a more formal name, the Liberal International Order. Think of it like a global blueprint, drawn up right after World War II. It had big institutions like the United Nations and the World Trade Organization acting as the trellises and fences, trying to keep everything growing in a somewhat orderly way.
So how was that stability kept in check? Well, it rested on these key pillars. For the most part, it was led by the United States. It operated on the idea of international law, and it was a huge champion of globalization. The core thinking was pretty simple, really. If we're all trading with each other, we'll all get richer and hopefully be a lot less likely to start a fight. The whole point was predictability.
But what happens when the walls of that garden start to crumble? This wasn't some overnight thing. The decay has been speeding up, and some recent major events have really pushed the whole system to its breaking point.
And you can see the cracks really starting to show on this timeline. The theory first popped up in the late 2010s, but then, bam, two massive shocks hit the system. First, the COVID-19 pandemic showed us just how fragile our global supply chains really were. And then, the war in Ukraine demonstrated that international law could just be openly ignored by a major world power. Each of these events was like a body blow to the old order.
So here's the absolute crucial point. We've massively shifted away from that dream of open global trade. Countries are now thinking about their own security first. They're pulling vital industries back home, and they're only willing to trade deeply with allies they really trust, a strategy people are calling friendshoring. Efficiency, well, that's taken a backseat to resilience, and that usually means things get more expensive, and the whole global economy has a lot more friction.
And all of this, well, it leads us right to the main event. If the well-tended, predictable garden is gone, what's taken its place? The answer, according to this analysis, is the jungle.
This quote from the strategist Yuan Peng is really the beating heart of this entire argument. It's just a stunning declaration that the era of cooperation is over. It's being replaced by a period of great chaos, where the oldest rule in the book, survival of the fittest, is making a huge comeback. And what's really underneath this whole shift is the idea that the unipolar moment is over. That period where the US was pretty much the single undisputed leader on the world stage, that's done. We are now in a very chaotic transition to what's called a multipolar world, where you have several different countries or groups of countries all competing for influence.
Okay, so if we are in a jungle now, then the rules of the game have totally changed. So what are the new rules of power in this wild, new era? It's really as simple and as brutal as that. The first and most important rule of the jungle is that raw power, we're talking military and economic muscle, matters a heck of a lot more than any international agreement or law on a piece of paper.
And we are seeing this play out right now, in real time. The analysis argues that international law is now just a fig leaf, something countries use to justify their actions, not to guide them. When a permanent member of the UN Security Council is involved in a war, what happens? The whole institution is basically paralyzed. Powerful countries just go around the rules.
This slide right here shows another massive seismic shift. The old promise was that connecting our economies would build bridges and stop wars. The new reality? That very same connection has been turned into a weapon.
The global chips war is the perfect example of this. I mean, semiconductors are in everything. But now, instead of being traded freely, they're at the very center of a massive geopolitical fight. Nations are using their control over these critical technologies to create strategic choke points, basically to gain leverage and cripple their rivals.
So if you're a country looking at this new, dangerous world, you just can't operate the way you used to. Your whole strategy has to change. So how are countries adapting to survive in this jungle?
This table just lays out the whole shift so clearly. The old strategy of engagement in trying to integrate everyone, that's been replaced by what they call bottom-line thinking and just preparing for the worst-case scenario. In economics, chasing pure efficiency by outsourcing everything is out. Building resilience with secure local supply chains is in. And in diplomacy, relying on big organizations like the UN is giving way to smaller, more flexible alliances based purely on self-interest.
And here are the actual steps countries are taking. First, they de-risk. They pour money into critical industries at home, think AI and green energy, so they're less dependent on other countries. It might make things more expensive, but it's seen as necessary. Second, they rearm. Military budgets are shifting away from peacekeeping missions and toward being ready for a major high-intensity war. And third, they get pragmatic. Alliances are now being formed based on hard interests, like security or energy access, not just on shared values. Which brings us to our last and most critical question. This new world is forcing countries to be self-reliant, to be ruthlessly pragmatic. But does that mean cooperation is totally dead? Or will we see new, smaller, more flexible groups of nations banding together to survive? In a world where the rulebook has been thrown out, is every nation truly on its own? That is the deeply unsettling reality of the jungle.